It was the kind of July afternoon that left the asphalt simmering like a stovetop. The sun blazed down over the backroads of rural Alabama, baking the fields and turning the air into a shimmering haze. Jason Moore squinted beneath the brim of his faded trucker cap, gripping the steering wheel of his dusty Ford pickup as it rattled down Highway 17. He'd been driving since dawn.
12 hours.
3 deliveries.
$80 in gas.
And just enough change left over for a microwaved burrito from the last gas station he stopped at. But Jason didn't complain. Work was work. After leaving the military 3 years ago, he'd found peace in the open road. It was predictable. Quiet. Safe. The radio crackled with an old Lynyrd Skynyrd track as Jason tapped his fingers on the wheel. The road stretched ahead in a lazy curve, flanked by pine trees and dry yellow grass. There wasn't another soul in sight. That was when he saw her. A figure, small and hunched, walking along the shoulder of the road. She wore a wide straw hat and clutched a worn canvas bag close to her chest. Even from a distance, Jason could tell she was elderly.
Maybe late 70s.
Maybe older. Her steps were slow dragging, her frame barely able to carry her weight. He eased off the gas. Something tugged at him. Maybe it was the way her shadow stretched long and alone across the road. Or maybe it was something deeper. A memory of his own grandmother waiting at the end of a dusty driveway with lemonade and stories. Jason slowed the truck and rolled to a stop beside her, lowering the passenger side window. "Ma'am," he called out, "you okay out here?"
It's a scorching today.
She paused, glancing up with cloudy blue eyes. Her voice was thin, but steady. "I'm trying to get home, son. But my legs, they just don't carry me like they used to." Jason leaned across the seat.
Where's home?
Just past Elridge. About 10 miles.
Et hésitated.
His route was the other way. But 10 miles wasn't much. Not really. And the idea of leaving this frail woman on the side of a baking highway didn't sit right. "Hop in," he said, pushing open the door.
Il take you.
She climbed in with difficulty, clutching her bag like it was all she had left in the world. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the seatbelt. Jason gave her a small smile and pulled back onto the road. For a few minutes, silence filled the cab. Only the hum of the engine and the drone of cicadas outside. Then Jason asked, "You got family in Elridge?" She nodded slowly. "I had a son. Haven't seen him in years. Word is, he came back. Folks say he's around those parts now." Jason nodded. "Hope you find him." The old woman didn't respond. Her gaze was fixed on the trees outside, her fingers still wrapped tight around the bag in her lap. Jason glanced at her sideways. There was something strange in her quiet.
Not just sadn, something else. Worry, maybe.
Fear? He cleared his throat.
Name is Jason, by the way.
She turned her head. "I'm Mabel."
They rode in silence again, the road winding like a snake through the countryside.
Jason couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Not about Mabel herself, but about the air around her. It was like the calm before a storm. Just as he was about to speak again, headlights flared in his rearview mirror. A black SUV. Jason frowned. The road had been empty for miles. The SUV sped up, pulling alongside his truck for a second, then falling back. He watched it through the side mirror. Tinted windows. No plates. His stomach tightened. Mabel seemed to sense his tension. She looked over, her voice barely above a whisper. "If they ask, you don't know me."
Jason blinked.
"What?" She gripped the bag tighter.
Just promise-me.
"Please." Before he could respond, the SUV surged forward and cut him off, skidding sideways across the Tulane highway. Jason slammed the brakes. Tires screeched. Dust flew. The truck lurched to a stop. 3 men jumped out of the SUV.
All in black.
Faces partially covered. One of them banged on Jason's hood with a heavy flashlight.
Out of the truck. The man barked.
Jason's military instincts kicked in. He kept his hands on the wheel, heart racing, eyes scanning.
"Who are you?"
Jason demanded, trying to keep his voice steady. The man stalked up to the driver's side window, his eyes sharp. "You've got something that doesn't belong to you." Jason's eyes flicked to Mabel. She sat frozen, pale, clutching her bag. The man leaned in, snarling. "Hand her over. Now." Jason's grip on the wheel tightened. Every part of him screamed to get out, to run, to do something. But Mabel's voice, soft, almost pleading, cut through the rising panic.
Don't let them take me.
"Please. I can explain. Just drive." Jason didn't know why he listened. Maybe it was the fear in her voice. Maybe it was the way the man's hand hovered near something hidden beneath his coat. Either way, he didn't think. He floored the gas. The truck jolted forward, ramming the edge of the SUV. One of the men was thrown to the ground. Jason swerved hard, tires screaming against gravel, then shot down the road, adrenaline flooding his veins.
Bullet craquait the air behind them.
Mabel ducked low in her seat, still gripping the bag. Jason didn't look back. He didn't have to. He knew they were being chased.
10 miles to El Ridge.
And now, the quiet road no longer felt safe. The tires screamed as Jason's pickup careened around a bend, gravel spraying from the shoulder as he fought to stay on the narrow road. The black SUV was still behind them, but gaining slower now, cautious after the initial surprise. He stole a quick glance at the rearview mirror. 2 of the men were back in the vehicle, one likely injured. But they weren't backing off. Mabel hadn't said a word since they'd fled. She huddled in her seat, pale and silent, the canvas bag clutched tightly in her arms like it contained her very soul. Jason's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. His thoughts spun like the wheels on the pavement. Who were those men? Why were they after Mabel? And why did she say not to let them take her? He pushed the truck harder, coaxing every ounce of speed from the old engine as they approached a fork in the road. A faded wooden sign pointed left toward Elridge. But Jason didn't take it. He veered right.
Ma belle Stirade.
That's not the way. Jason shot her a sharp glance. Exactly. I have to go to Elridge, she said, her voice barely audible. That's where. They'll expect us to go there. If we do, we're driving straight into a trap. Mabel clutched the bag tighter, as if his words had only confirmed her fears. Jason took the side road, a winding path that led into the hills, flanked by thick woods and old farmland. It was familiar terrain to him. He'd hunted in these hills with his father as a boy, long before the war, long before life had gotten complicated. After 5 minutes of tense silence, the SUV was nowhere in sight. Jason pulled off onto a dirt road that led into a patch of woods, following it until the trees grew thick and the road was no longer visible from the main route. He stopped the truck and killed the engine. The silence was immediate. Just the soft rustle of wind through pine needles and the distant call of cicadas. Jason turned in his seat to face Mabel. All right. I need answers. She didn't speak. Her eyes were fixed on the bag. Jason leaned forward, his voice low and serious.
I puis myself on the lean back there.
I deserve to know what the hell is going on. Mabel finally looked at him. Her gaze was heavy, ancient. You're right, she said. But I don't know where to begin. Start with the truth, Jason said. Why were they after you? She hesitated, then slowly unzipped the canvas bag. Inside was a bundle wrapped in cloth. She peeled it back carefully, revealing a stack of old documents, photos, and a single small metal box. Jason frowned.
What is all that?
My husband Howard, she began slowly. He worked for the government. Decades ago. He was a records clerk.
Nothing special.
At least that's what I thought. She took out a photo, a black and white image of a younger man in military uniform, standing beside a building with no sign or insignia. After he died, I found these things hidden in our attic. At first, I thought they were just mementos. But then I started reading. Jason watched her closely. Her hands trembled as she pulled out one of the documents. It was yellowed with age, stamped with a red confidential across the top. He had copies of files he wasn't supposed to have, she said. Names, locations, surveillance reports. Things connected to black ops. Secret facilities. People who vanished. Jason leaned closer, his instincts alert. You're saying he stole classified government records? I think he was trying to protect them, she said. Or maybe, protect me. He never told me. But after I started digging, strange things began happening.
Letters missing from the mailbox.
My phone ringing in the middle of the night with no one on the other end. Jason rubbed his temples. So the people chasing you, they want what's in this bag. Yes, Mabel said, her voice steady now. And they'll do anything to get it back. Jason stared at the box. What's in there? Mabel hesitated, then lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in a velvet pouch, was a USB drive.
Jason blinked.
All this for that? It's not the drive itself, Mabel said.
It's what is on it. Record.
Names. Some of them still active. Whistleblower reports that never made it to the media. Things my husband must have collected. Or copied. Jason sat back, trying to process it all. This wasn't just some paranoid fantasy. This was real. The SUV. The men. The urgency in Mabel's voice.
It all clicked.
You were trying to bring this to your son, he said.
Mabel's eyes grew wet.
He disappeared 5 years ago. He worked in Elridge. A systems analyst. He'd been asking questions, digging into something. And then, he was gone. They called it suicide. But I never believed it. Jason nodded slowly. He knew the type. People who got too close. People who asked the wrong questions. What are you planning to do with it? He asked. I don't know, she said. But if something happens to me, I want it in the right hands. Not the media, they'll spin it. I need someone who cares. Someone who can finish what Howard and my son started. Jason looked at the bag, then at Mabel. The lines in her face, the weight in her eyes, she wasn't lying. This wasn't some wild goose chase. This was real. He sighed, rubbing his face. I have a contact.
Olfrien from my time in the army. Works in counterintelligence now.
He might be able to get this to the right people. Mabel clutched his hand. Please. Help me. Jason looked out at the woods, quiet and dark, as if holding its breath. There was no going back now. We'll lay low for the night, he said. Then we'll make a plan. She nodded. For the first time, Jason saw a flicker of hope in her eyes. But deep down he knew, hope was fragile. And someone out there was still hunting.
Dawn crept over the treetop, casting thin streak of light through the canopy and into the small clearing where Jason's truck sat hidden.
The air was cool, crisp, almost peaceful, but Jason hadn't slept. He sat on the hood of the truck, sipping lukewarm coffee from a thermos, his eyes fixed on the dirt road below. He could feel it, movement, tension in the atmosphere, like the forest was watching and waiting. Behind him, Mabel stirred in the passenger seat, wrapped in an old army issue blanket he had found in the back of the truck. Her first words came as a whisper. Thank you. Jason didn't respond right away. He took another sip from the thermos, letting the silence stretch between them. I've made mistakes before, he finally said. Helping people who didn't deserve it. Trusting the wrong voices. She looked at him, confused. And now? I'm not sure yet, Jason replied. But I'm not letting you walk into Elridge alone. The town was still 40 miles south.
À Quiet, Forgotten Place nestled along the Appalachian foothills.
It was once a mining town, but now served as a corporate backwater, a place where no one asked too many questions. A perfect hiding spot for those who didn't want to be found. Jason opened the map he'd pulled from the glove box. It was old, creased, but still legible. He marked a few roads with a pen. There's a rest stop on the ridge just north of Elridge, he said.
Good vantage.
I want to scope it out before we go in. Mabel nodded, clutching the canvas bag again. An hour later, they were on the move. The ride was quiet.
The forest gave way to rolling hills and crumbling barn.
Cell service flickered in and out, and Jason kept his phone in airplane mode, not wanting to risk a signal trace. Every vehicle on the road drew his attention. Every parked car felt like a trap. Mabel finally broke the silence. My son's name was David, she said, staring out the window. He was gentle. Thoughtful. He loved numbers as a boy. Said they made sense when the world didn't.
Jason glanced over, waiting.
He got a job with one of the federal contractors in Elridge, she continued. Said he was working on security systems, nothing classified. But then, he started asking questions. He found discrepancies in data logs. Ghost accesses to private files. Passwords used at odd hours. He brought it to a supervisor. Weeks later, he vanished.
Official story.
Jason asked. Suicide, she said. They said he drowned. But the body was never found. And the report was rushed.
Jason exhaled slowly.
It was a pattern he'd seen before, loose ends tied up neatly, questions buried. We need to find out what he was investigating, he said. I think it's connected to this, she replied, tapping the canvas bag. The names in the files. Some of them match personnel David flagged in his notes. There's a network. Jason didn't like the sound of that word.
You mean a conspiracy?
Maybe. Or a cover-up. But there's something here. The rest stop on the ridge came into view an hour later. Jason pulled into a shaded spot and cut the engine. From here, the road dipped into Elridge proper, a sleepy sprawl of rusted warehouses, strip malls, and government-leased office parks. It didn't look dangerous. But Jason had long ago learned that threats rarely wore a label. He took out his binoculars and scanned the town. There, he said. That building near the water tower. Looks like a security complex. Mabel nodded. That's where David worked. Jason studied the parking lot. 2 vehicles out front. Civilian plates.
No gare visible.
If we're lucky, the place might be running skeleton staff. Or it's bait, Mabel said quietly. Jason grinned, despite himself.
You recharpe then you look.
She raised an eyebrow. You think you're the only one who's been in dangerous situations? They made a plan. Jason would go in alone.
Recon.
If the place was abandoned, they'd decide whether to dig deeper. If not, they'd turn back. He handed Mabel his backup phone.
If I'm not back in 30 minutes, drive. No question.
She hesitated, then took it. Jason headed down into Elridge on foot, keeping to side roads and old paths. He moved like a shadow, his military training coming back like muscle memory. He avoided the main roads, hopped fences, used trees for cover. When he finally reached the building, he crouched in a thicket across the street and studied the entrance.
No movement. Windows dark. A security kept by the front door.
No cameras. He crossed quickly and pressed himself against the wall. Then he heard it. A voice. From inside.
Jason froze.
Then inched toward the side of the building. A small window was cracked open. He risked a glance.
2 men inside.
One sitting at a desk, monitoring a laptop. The other pacing. He's on the move, the man at the desk said. Left the ridge 20 minutes ago. Satellite ping shows he's maybe 2 blocks out. Jason's heart slammed in his chest. They were tracking him. Not just following. Tracking. Get the gear ready, the second man said.
We can't closer again.
And make sure the files don't leave the building. Jason backed away, low and silent. Then turned and sprinted the way he came, lungs burning. Mabel was waiting in the truck, eyes wide when he burst into view. They knew, he gasped. They knew we were coming. He threw the truck into gear and peeled out of the lot. Someone is tracking us, he said.
Through the USB. Maybe something inside the bag.
We need to dump it. Mabel looked stricken. It's all we have.
Jason talked fast. We keep the drive. We dump the rest.
Decoys. They're chasing a signal, not a person. He pulled into a service station and jumped out. Grabbed an old cereal box from the trash, stuffed it with the contents of the bag minus the USB, then tossed it into the back of a delivery truck idling by the pumps. Back in the driver's seat, Jason sped off, taking back roads through a network of winding hills. 5 miles later, he pulled into a culvert and parked. We lost them for now, he said. But they'll figure it out eventually. Mabel was silent for a long time. Then she reached into her coat and pulled out something Jason hadn't seen before.
A photograph.
Of a child. Jason looked at it, puzzled. My grandson, she said softly.
David est son.
He's in protective custody. I never told you before. But, if something happens to me, he's next. Jason stared at her, something hard settling in his chest. This wasn't just a story about hidden files anymore. This was about blood. Legacy. And unfinished wars. Jason sat behind the wheel, knuckles white on the steering wheel, the photograph of the boy still lying on the dashboard between them. The image was slightly worn, creased at the edges from being handled too many times. The boy couldn't have been more than 6 or 7. A soft smile on his lips. A glint in his eyes that was too familiar. He has David's eyes, Jason murmured. Mabel nodded slowly, her voice barely audible. And his stubbornness. They sat in silence for a moment, the tension humming between them like a taut wire.
Jason leaned back, letting out a long, tirade brise.
You should have told me earlier. I didn't know if I could trust you, she said, not as an accusation, but as a statement of fact. And I wasn't sure if you'd keep helping once you realized what we're really up against.
Jason glanced at her.
You think this is just about you? No, she said. It's about what David found. And now, it's about what happens if that little boy grows up in a world where people like this keep winning. Jason stared out the windshield. The hills rolled out in front of them, veiled in morning mist. There was a heaviness on his chest now, not just from what he'd seen, but from what he felt coming. The weight of implication. Of responsibility. We need help, he finally said. Real help.
You mean the police?
Jason shook his head. Too many jurisdictions, too many layers.
We don't know où est-ce compromised.
Then who? Jason started the engine. There's someone I know. He used to be NSA. Burned a lot of bridges, but he's clean. If he's still in Charleston, he might know what to do with that USB. Mabel clutched the bag tighter. We just keep driving then? No, Jason said. We move differently now. Split routes, change vehicles, rotate plates. No more hotels, no digital trails. They ditched the truck that afternoon in an old mechanic's lot on the outskirts of Asheville. Jason swapped it for a dusty blue sedan that hadn't seen use in a decade but ran like it had been built yesterday. They changed clothes at a thrift store, bought with cash. New phones. Clean SIM cards. By the time they hit the state border, the sky was beginning to darken. Jason didn't talk much. He drove with the intensity of someone scanning every mile for traps. Tell me about this NSA friend, Mabel finally said.
Nemes Evan Marsh, Jason said.
We worked together once. He specialized in cyber forensics, back when data leaks were rare and messy. He's the kind of guy who reads metadata like scripture. Why isn't he still with the agency?
Jason smirked bitterly.
He started asking questions.
Just like David.
The road curved into a long tunnel beneath a stretch of mountain. For a moment, they were surrounded by darkness, headlights bouncing off the concrete walls. Jason felt the weight of memory pressing in. He exposed a surveillance program being used to monitor journalists. Got burned for it. They painted him as mentally unstable. He went off the grid for a while. Last I heard, he's running a server farm under a laundromat. And you trust him? I trust that he hates being lied to, Jason said. They arrived in Charleston just after midnight. Jason parked 3 blocks from the address he had in mind and proceeded on foot, eyes alert. Mabel followed, silent and sure-footed. The laundromat was a plain, forgettable storefront nestled between a closed pawn shop and a boarded-up deli.
Neon lights buzzed overhead.
Inside, a few washing machines hummed lazily. An old woman with a crossword puzzle sat behind the counter. Jason walked in and dropped a quarter into a random machine. It whirred to life. Then he turned, tapped twice on a vending machine near the back wall, paused, then tapped once more.
Nothing happened.
Mabel raised an eyebrow. Jason frowned. He turned back to the woman behind the counter. Is Evan here? She stared at him over her glasses, then slowly reached beneath the counter and pressed something.
A loud clink échoed from the vending machine.
The bottom panel popped open.
Jason stepped through.
Behind the machine was a narrow staircase leading down into a dimly lit hallway. Fluorescent bulbs flickered overhead. The air smelled faintly of ozone and soldered wires. At the end of the hall was a reinforced steel door. Jason knocked 3 times, paused, then knocked twice. A slot opened.
One eye peered out.
Jason Cole, said a voice.
Thought you were dead.
Not yet, Jason replied. The door opened. Evan March hadn't changed much. Tall, wiry, grey creeping into his temples. His eyes were sharp, calculating, but something about his posture was relaxed, like he expected the worst and had made peace with it. Jason introduced Mabel, then handed over the USB. March turned it over in his hands. It's encrypted? Jason nodded.
Deployé.
Might be some defensive triggers too. March gestured them into a cluttered server room filled with humming machines and tangled cords. He plugged the drive into a terminal and began typing.
Tell me everything.
Mabel recounted her story again.
David.
The files. The disappearance. The photograph of her grandson. March listened, expression unreadable. As he worked, lines of code and metadata scrolled across the monitor. Whoever built this encryption, he said, they knew what they were doing. There's fragmentation, honeycombed keys, even environmental variables. Environmental? Jason asked. Time-based locks. Location-based access. This thing won't fully decrypt unless it's open from a specific IP range. My guess, the facility in Elridge.
Smart. Paranoia.
Can you get around it? March cracked his knuckles. With time. Maybe. Outside, the storm clouds were beginning to roll in.
Thunder grumbled on the horizon.
The servers whirred louder as if responding. Then March's eyes narrowed. Wait, there's a beacon.
Jason stepped closer. What kind of beacon? L'offre ping.
Silent. It's been broadcasting since activation. It's how they tracked you.
Mabel gasped. Can you kill it?
March nodded. I just did. But if they caught the last signal, they're coming. Jason stood. Then we move. Now. Take this, March said, handing him a second drive.
It's a mirror of what I've cracked so far. Not everything.
But enough to scare them.
Will you be okay?
Mabel asked.
March shrugged.
They already think I'm crazy. Maybe they'll overlook me.
Jason grabbed the drive.
Thank you. As they made their way back to the street, rain began to fall. Cold. Heavy.
Jason glanced at Mabel.
You still want to see this through? She looked back at him, eyes full of quiet fire.
I'm not turning back now.
And neither was he. Rain pelted the sidewalks in heavy sheets as Jason and Mabel exited the laundromat. The narrow alley behind them seemed to close like a door as the sound of the storm swallowed everything else. Jason led the way to a side street where they'd stashed their car. But when they turned the corner, Jason froze. Their blue sedan sat under the amber glow of a street lamp, but something was off. The windshield wipers were twitching. The rear door on the passenger side hung slightly ajar. A shimmer of water rolled down the sloped rear glass, and through it, Jason spotted movement. Back, he whispered. Now. Mabel didn't question. They slipped behind a dumpster just as two figures emerged from the car, moving quickly. One had a silencer-equipped pistol in hand. The other scanned the alley with a flashlight. They were waiting, Mabel whispered. Jason nodded grimly. Or they followed us here faster than we thought. He checked his coat pocket. The mirrored USB from Evan was still there, dry and secure. Mabel pulled out her phone, but Jason shook his head. No signals. If we call out now, we give them our exact position.
Thunder rumbled again, closer this time.
Jason peered around the corner of the dumpster. The men were splitting up, each moving in opposite directions. We can't stay here, he said. Once they sweep this block, they'll find us.
Where then?
Jason's eyes searched the landscape. Across the street, just beyond the intersection, stood an old church. Its front door hung slightly open, swaying in the wind. There, he pointed.
On my signal, we go fast.
Quiet. They waited until the flashlight beam arced away. Jason counted silently, 3, 2, 1, and then they ran. The rain masked their footsteps. They crossed the street and ducked inside the church just as the second figure turned around. But they were already hidden in shadow. Inside, the church smelled of damp wood and crumbling stone. Pews lined the narrow aisle, and a broken crucifix hung crooked above the altar. Jason moved toward the back, searching for another exit. Mabel's breath came in soft, shallow bursts. She held her bag tightly, as though afraid someone might rip it from her at any second. Jason found a narrow stairwell leading down. "This way," he said, motioning her through.
We wait out.
"Then move again." They crept down into the basement, where old hymn books and rusted folding chairs were stacked in disorder. It was cold. Damp. But hidden. For nearly 20 minutes, they waited. Jason listened to the creaking boards above, the distant echo of footsteps.
And then silence.
"They're gone," Mabel said. "Or they're setting up a perimeter," Jason replied. "Either way, we can't risk staying." He pulled out the second drive March had given him and stared at it. "What's on that?" Mabel asked.
Un œuf to start a war, Jason murmure.
"Files. Images. Names. Payment trails. A network of shell companies connecting private security firms to foreign contractors." At the center was the name Elridge, but like a spider in a web, its threads extended across agencies and borders. "They're doing more than stealing data," Jason continued. "They're manufacturing leverage. Threats. Blackmail. Like what they did to David." Jason nodded.
They don't juste silence whistleblower.
"They bury them in legal mud, ruin their families, then wipe their trail clean.
Mabelle's eyes darkened.
Then we make sure it's not clean this time." Jason stood. "We go to D.C. I've got a contact at the Chronicle, independent investigative press. They've taken on giants before. If we get this to them, they can force it public before anyone can bury it."
Mabel hésitated.
"What if they won't believe us?" "Then we make them believe." They exited through the back of the church, avoiding main roads. Jason flagged down a rideshare using a dummy account. Within minutes, they were in the back seat of a beat-up SUV, headed north. As the city lights faded behind them, Mabel turned to him.
"You're risking everything for this."
"Why?" Jason didn't answer immediately. Then he said, "Because I've seen what silence costs. I once ignored something I should have exposed. A cover-up. A death."
It's haunt me.
Mabel reached over, gently touched his hand. "Then maybe this is your second chance." They drove through the night, switching vehicles twice more before reaching the outskirts of Washington, D.C. Jason's contact at the Chronicle was a seasoned journalist named Grace Lynn. He hadn't spoken to her in over a year, not since she'd broken a story that brought down a high-ranking senator and disappeared from public view for months. They met in a cafe near DuPont Circle, under the watchful eyes of strangers and cameras. Grace arrived in a hoodie and sunglasses, looking like someone who never wanted to be recognized again. Jason passed her the drive. She looked at it, then looked at him.
What is this?
Proof, he said.
Of everything.
Grace slid it into a small pouch and tucked it inside her bag. You realize what this could do? Jason nodded. Yeah. I also know what happens if no one does anything. She glanced at Mabel. You his partner?
Mabel shook her head.
No. Just a grandmother with a score to settle.
Grace's lips curled into the faintest smile. You'll be in touch.
As she disappeared down the street, Jason felt a strange sense of calm. Like they'd passed a crucial threshold. But with it came a darker feeling, anticipation. They won't let this go quietly, Mabel said. No, Jason agreed. But we're not quiet anymore either. Back at their safe house, a short-term rental booked under an assumed name, Jason began preparing for the fallout. He checked security cameras, encrypted their phones, and backed up the USB contents to several cloud vaults using rotating VPNs. Mabel sat near the window, staring at the city skyline. Her fingers rested on a small leather-bound notebook. I wrote him letters, she said suddenly. Every week, even when I didn't know where he was. I told myself one day he'd write back. Jason looked over. What would you tell him now? She smiled sadly. That he didn't fail. That someone listened. Jason didn't reply. But he knew she was right. Because what David had started, what he died for, was now too loud to be silenced.
The morning sun broke through a thin veil of clouds à Washington DC stirred awak, oblivious to the key storm unraveling behind the scene.
In a modest brownstone apartment nestled in the outskirts of Adams Morgan, Jason and Mabel were already up, reviewing their next move. Grace Lynn had confirmed receipt of the drive and sent a single message at dawn, valid. Working with legal. Drop spot needed in 36 hours. It was as much a go-ahead as it was a warning. Now that the information was being authenticated, the countdown had begun. Once the pieces moved, there would be no slowing them down. And the ones pulling the strings, the ones David had tried to expose, would know soon enough. Jason sat at the small dining table, poring over maps and surveillance grids. He'd marked safe exits, monitored local chatter on the dark web, and cycled through burner phones with paranoid precision. Mabel sat across from him, sipping weak coffee, her eyes focused not on the chaos outside but on the notebook in her hands. It was David's, one of the few things left in the trail of his disappearance, a leather-bound relic of his thoughts and observations. In it, between technical diagrams and ciphered names, were scattered lines of poetry, fragments of prayers, and sketches of rooftops and rain. He used to draw the places he felt safest, Mabel murmured. Said it helped him remember that peace still existed somewhere. Jason looked up. He held on longer than anyone expected. He was strong. Mabel nodded. He wasn't just strong. He believed. That's what broke them. They couldn't make him stop believing. Outside, a black SUV idled on the far side of the street. Jason's instincts kicked in. He grabbed the scope from the window shelf and studied the vehicle.
2 men inside. No marking.
Tinted windows. The driver wasn't checking a phone or sipping coffee. He was watching. They found us, Jason said, standing. Mabel didn't panic. She closed the notebook and stood too, already sliding the small pistol Jason had given her into the fold of her coat. How many? She asked. 2 in the SUV. But if they're smart, they've got backup watching the alleys. We need to move. Jason retrieved the encrypted hard drive backups and stuffed them into a weatherproof bag. He handed Mabel a second burner phone and nodded toward the back door. They exited through a narrow service stairwell that led to a maintenance alley, keeping their heads low. Jason paused before the end of the block, peeking out just in time to see the SUV's passenger step out and speak into a radio. They're closing the net, he said. We won't outrun them on foot. Mabel pointed to a nearby metro entrance. Subway. Jason shook his head.
Tout prédictable.
They'll have eyes there. He scanned the street, then spotted a construction site across from a bakery. The scaffolding led to an adjacent rooftop, one of the old brick apartment complexes built before the war. David had drawn rooftops. Come on, he said. They crossed the street under cover of delivery trucks and ducked behind a wooden barrier. Jason helped Mabel climb up first, then followed, ascending the scaffolding 2 steps at a time. The rooftop was flat and wide, littered with air vents and utility boxes. Jason led Mabel to the far end, where they could see the street below. The SUV was empty now. They're on foot, he whispered. Looking for us. Suddenly, Mabel's phone buzzed. One word from Grace, compromised.
Jason's blood ran cold.
They found her too. He tapped into his secure channel, pulling up traffic feeds and scraping license plates. One of the tailing cars matched a vehicle registered to a defunct logistics firm linked to Elridge's offshore accounts. They're using shell companies as cover, he muttered. Mabel adjusted her coat and looked at him. You said if the story breaks before they find us, it's over for them. Yes. Then we need to make sure the story breaks. Jason nodded.
We split up.
No, Mabel said firmly.
We stay together.
It's safer if one of us runs a decoy. I didn't come all this way to let you carry the weight alone. Jason paused. He saw the steel in her eyes. Mabel wasn't just a grandmother. She was a mother who'd already buried too much.
She wouldn't let David Estrus die in silence.
All right, he said finally. We go to the vault. He pulled out a map, showing her a location tucked inside the city's underbelly, a disused courier depot Jason had used years ago as an emergency broadcast node. We upload everything from there. Every file. Every name. It goes out to multiple independent outlets. Once it's in the wild, they can't put it back in the bottle.
Mabel memorized the route.
Let's finish this. They moved at dusk, blending with the city's shift into nighttime. Jason borrowed a delivery van from an old contact, using fake tags and a disguised plate. By the time they reached the depot, the city had settled into the hum of routine oblivion. The depot was abandoned in every sense.
Rusté dingue. Broken lights.
But the server room in the back, surrounded by concrete and lead mesh, still functioned on a backup grid Jason had rigged years prior. Jason booted up the system, plugged in the first drive, and launched a multi-channel upload. VPN layers flared to life, cycling through global relays. File packets jumped from node to node, like ghosts fleeing hunters. Mabel stood by the door, pistol in hand. Then her phone buzzed. Another message from Grace, "They're here." A second later, Jason heard the telltale crunch of gravel under boots outside. "We're out of time," he said. He glanced at the upload bar. 72%. He slipped a drive into a pre-loaded drone and powered it up.
The small quadcopter buzzed to life.
"If they breach, this flies. It'll reach the press if we don't." Mabel looked at him. "And if it gets shot down?" "Then we send another."
End another.
Until one of them breaks through. The door rattled violently. Jason held up a hand, counting down in his head. The final part of the upload completed. He hit distribute, and data began to scatter across the world.
The door burst open.
2 armed men in tactical gear rushed in.
Jason ducked behind the console, drawing fire.
Mabel returned shots, holding them off. Drones launched, Jason yelled, "We're clear." But as they tried to retreat, another figure appeared at the rear exit, taller, older, with cold eyes and a silenced pistol.
"Elridge," Jason whispered. The man raised the weapon.
A gunshot echoed, but it wasn't Elridge who fired. Grace stepped from the shadows behind him, holding a small caliber pistol. Elridge dropped like a felled tree. "Figured you'd need backup," Grace said.
Jason exhaled.
"You followed us?" "Tracked the drone ID. It's good you still use my code."
Mabel smiled through the smoke.
"Told you it wasn't over." Jason nodded. "No. But now it's beginning." They stood there, amid the rubble and dust, the echoes of battle still fresh. But above all that, the quiet hum of the server sang a different tune. The truth had been set free. By the time dawn stretched over the Capitol dome, the world had already begun to change. News alerts popped like firecrackers across the globe. Independent media sites, foreign outlets, anonymous whistleblower blogs, all lit up with one central theme: a leak of classified documents connecting private defense firms, government contractors, and rogue intelligence operations in a multi-decade black network rooted deep in the American security state. The files were dense, thousands of pages, some going back to the late 1990s, documenting illicit surveillance programs, coerced disappearances, and financial ties between elected officials and clandestine operations. A few documents were redacted, but the majority had been preserved by the data protocols Jason and Evan March had embedded before transmission. Major networks didn't dare touch the story at first. But they couldn't avoid it either. Within 6 hours, the New York Sentinel released a statement acknowledging receipt of verified files of great public interest. Within 10, the first televised panel began to speculate. By the afternoon, it had breached the White House press room. Back in the safe house, Jason watched from the floor, leaning against the wall, a faint bruise on his cheek and dried blood along his sleeve. He hadn't slept. He wasn't even sure if his body would let him. Mabel stood at the window, her arms crossed. She hadn't said much since they escaped the depot. She watched the city wake as if seeing it for the first time, not with wonder, but with hard-earned clarity. "The president will deny it," she said flatly. "They'll call it fake.
Disinformation.
Try to flip the narrative." Jason nodded. "They'll have to. Damage control is their only play now." Mabel turned. "Do you think David ever imagined it would come to this?" Jason didn't answer right away. He picked up David's notebook, which now sat between them like an altar. "He didn't just imagine it," Jason said. "He planned for it. He left breadcrumbs. The drone protocols, the dead drops, the encryption formats, he built all of it to survive even if he didn't." Mabel lowered herself slowly into the armchair by the corner. "That's what I couldn't protect him from. The scale of it. I thought I could warn him off. Keep him quiet. But the more I tried to pull him back, the more he leaned in." "He saw what others didn't," Jason replied. "And you didn't fail him." You're the reason this all came to light. The burner phone on the table buzzed. Jason checked it. A secure message from Evan. They're arresting mid-level contractors. 3 resignations already. Names are holding.
You were right.
It's spreading. Jason showed the message to Mabel, who nodded solemnly. It's a beginning. But beginnings were never easy. An hour later, Grace arrived at the safe house with a duffel bag slung over her shoulder and a hardened expression on her face. She dropped a folder on the table. Inside were printouts of social media traffic, email threads, and leaked memos. Some praised the leaks. Others screamed treason. One prominent senator was calling for domestic terrorism charges against those responsible for endangering national security. They're building a counterattack, Grace said. Legal teams.
PR bleeds.
Discrediting you is top priority.
Jason gave a bitterlog.
Wouldn't expect anything less. You need to vanish, Grace added. Both of you. I'm not running, Mabel said. You don't have to, Grace replied. You need to disappear for now.
Let the story breathe without becoming the story. Jason walked to the window. The sirens in the distance weren't urgent yet.
But they would be. I'll go north, he said. I've got a spot in Vermont. Remote. Quiet.
No record.
Grace looked at him. And her. She comes with me, Jason said, turning.
If she's willing. Mabel stood, steady à ver.
I've spent 5 years being quiet. I can spend 1 more. But after that, I speak. Grace nodded. You'll have your chance. Trust me, the world's going to need your voice. Before they left, Grace handed Jason one last envelope. Inside are names of sympathetic agents, a few journalists still clean, and a route map avoiding flagged zones.
You only get one chance at this.
Jason took it without a word. An hour later, they left the safe house, not as fugitives but as shadows. The city moved around them like clockwork. Taxis stopped, crosswalks blinked, coffee shops filled. People read headlines, but most didn't understand yet what they meant. Jason and Mabel boarded a bus heading north, paid in cash, and sat in the back near the emergency exit. Neither spoke for the first hour. Mabel clutched her son's notebook, her eyes closed but her mind racing. Finally, she said, there's a moment when grief becomes something else. It hardens.
Sharpant.
And it turns into purpose. Jason looked over. You think we've reached that moment? Mabel opened her eyes. No. But I think we're close. 2 days later, in a cabin nestled deep in the Green Mountains, they watched as the first congressional hearings were announced. Senators demanded accountability. Whistleblowers began to emerge. A high-ranking defense executive turned himself in and requested protection in exchange for cooperation. The first tangible crack in the armor.
Jason stood on the porch of the cabin, staring into the Kie forest.
Mabel sat inside, writing, this time not letters to the dead, but statements for the living. Her voice would be needed. Soon. And in a sealed envelope on the table, addressed to Grace, was a final instruction. If anything happened to them, release everything. Video testimony, personal accounts, trace logs.
No more silence. No more shadow.
The world was changing, one truth at a time. The cold air of early spring clung to the ridges around the cabin, laced with the scent of thawed earth and pine. Jason spent his mornings walking the tree line, listening for anything out of place. No drones. No vehicles.
No footstep crunching snow.
Only the wind, and the occasional scurry of deer. Inside, Mabel had taken over the modest wooden desk by the window. Pinned to the wall were notes, quotes, dates. Her son's notebook lay open beside her, pages dog-eared and worn. On the opposite side of the desk sat a battered laptop, air-gapped and shielded. Jason had rigged it for secure storage only, no signals in or out.
Just a place forward.
Each day, Mabel wrote. Not memoir.
Note confession.
Testimony. The story of David, not just his death, but his belief. His decision to gather evidence instead of giving in. His late-night fears, his guilt over secrets, and his final message. Mabel wrote not as a grieving mother, but as a witness. She documented names, details of meetings, conversations she'd overheard in the agency, internal memos she had quietly copied and archived before leaving. Jason watched the transformation in her, the way grief forged something sharp and luminous. One evening, while chopping wood outside the cabin, Jason heard the crunch of tires on gravel. He froze. A single black SUV appeared down the long dirt road.
No marking. Windows tinted.
Jason dropped the axe, stepped back toward the cabin, hand instinctively brushing the grip of the pistol tucked beneath his coat. Mabel had already moved to the door, the satchel containing David's notebook and her own files strapped across her chest. The SUV stopped 20 feet away. The driver's door opened. Out stepped Grace. Her coat was dusted with snow, her face pale and tired. But her posture was unshaken. You could have called, Jason muttered, lowering his stance.
Grace gave a tirade smile.
Would have ruined the surprise. Inside the cabin, Grace dropped a flash drive onto the table. This is the latest round of files that went public. You might want to read the statements being released by some of the retired generals. People are jumping ship. Jason scanned the drive quickly.
End the counter push.
Still coming, but it's flailing. The president's approval ratings are in freefall. Committee hearings are multiplying. They've opened a formal investigation into Signet, and 2 Senate subcommittees are being pulled into closed-door reviews. Mabel looked up. But none of them are talking about David. Grace paused. Not yet. Mabel's voice didn't waver. They need to. Grace set down a second folder. This one was thinner. Inside were 2 laminated badges with clearance codes.
What is this?
Jason asked. Grace looked to Mabel.
A chance to tell your story.
The Senate Intelligence Committee is calling a special witness session. Closed to the public, but on record. They want you to testify.
Mabel's eyes flickered to the window.
Snow was starting to fall again.
Andy fit refuse.
They'll subpoena you, Grace said. But it's better if you walk in under your own terms. Jason's jaw tightened. It's too early. They're not ready to hear her. Not yet. No, Grace replied, but the country is. 3 days later, they arrived in Washington. Quietly, discreetly, under the escort of a federal security unit that owed more allegiance to Grace than any agency. The city was colder than Mabel remembered, its marble buildings stark against the gray sky. The hearing took place in a private chamber beneath the Capitol, 2 floors underground. No cameras. No journalists. Only a dozen senators, a stenographer, and a handful of aides. The room smelled of dry paper and aged leather. Mabel walked in wearing black. Not mourning clothes, but something darker, more precise. The notebook was in her hands. Jason sat behind her, expression unreadable. Grace stood beside the door, arms folded. When Mabel began speaking, her voice did not tremble. She started with David's childhood. His fascination with systems. His moral curiosity. She spoke of his recruitment, the subtle pressure from handlers, the quiet horror he began to carry as his assignments darkened. She read excerpts from his journal, about the moment he realized he was being used to clean up after illegal operations. About the orders that came down without names, only codes. About the moment he decided to start documenting everything. She told the senators how, in his final weeks, he knew they were watching him. He knew they might come. But he kept writing. When she described the day he died, the room was silent. No questions interrupted her. No objections were raised. When she finished, she placed the notebook gently on the table before her. This is not just my son's story, she said. This is a story about systems that do not care who they destroy to maintain control. You've spent decades funding these operations.
Now you can't pretend not to know.
One senator leaned forward. Mrs. Trask, do you have evidence that links this network directly to current government officials? She nodded. Yes. And I have more than what I gave Grace. Jason glanced at her sharply. Mabel reached into her coat and pulled out a second notebook, handwritten in different ink.
Jason exhaled.
He hadn't known. Mabel continued. I was an operations analyst for 9 years. You think I didn't know how to hedge my bets? The committee's lead counsel took the notebook, examined its seal. We'll have it verified, he said.
If it check out.
It will, Mabel interrupted. The hearing ended in a quiet murmur. As they left, one senator followed them into the hallway. "You may have just changed everything," he said to Mabel. "I didn't come to change everything," she replied. "I came to make sure my son didn't die in silence." Outside, reporters circled like hawks. Word had already leaked that a key witness had testified behind closed doors.
Jason guided Mabel into the waiting car.
Grace remained behind, speaking into her phone. That night, they returned to the safe house. No lights. No noise. Only the weight of what had begun. For the first time since her son's death, Mabel slept without waking. The next morning, a leaked transcript of the hearing began to circulate.
The Nation read David Esward.
Read his mother's testimony. And everything began to shift.
The tide was rising.
By the end of that week, the world was no longer the same. News outlets across the country scrambled to verify the leaked transcript. Independent journalists dug into the documents that matched dates, code names, and locations. David Trask's name, once unknown outside the classified halls of a forgotten division, now trended on every platform. They called him the silent whistleblower. The media focused on the network of corruption he had exposed. Contracts funneled through shell corporations. Covert actions buried beneath layers of plausible deniability. Military aid used as a cover for arms trafficking. David's notebook, authenticated by multiple forensic experts, became irrefutable evidence that a significant faction of the intelligence community had long gone rogue. Capitol Hill turned into a battleground. 2 senators from opposing parties called for emergency hearings, while another attempted to dismiss the leaks as misinterpretations of internal documents. The president issued a short, calculated statement: "We take these allegations seriously, and all necessary investigations will be supported." But the lack of emotion in his voice betrayed more than politics, it revealed fear. Mabel watched it all from a secure location north of Arlington. The safe house had been upgraded, now monitored by a rotation of agents who reported directly to the new Independent Investigative Commission. Grace paced the living room, phone glued to her ear. Jason sat on the window ledge, sipping cold coffee, reading updates from a secure tablet. The nation buzzed with rumors, of resignations being drafted, of sealed indictments waiting for release. But something else had started.
A backlash.
Online trolls called David a traitor. Anonymous accounts flooded social media with claims that the notebooks were forged. Right-wing pundits screamed about deep state manipulation, while others accused Mabel of orchestrating a hoax for personal gain. Grace turned from the window. "It's starting." Jason looked up. Coordinated pushback? Worse. They found her. Mabel stood slowly from her seat. "Who?"
Senator Raymond Whitley.
Chair of the National Defense Oversight Committee. "He's accusing you of espionage. Says you stole classified material, misused it for political blackmail."
Jason Kirstender Isbris.
"They're going to try and flip this." "They don't have the leverage," Grace said. "But they have media control. Whitley's allies are lining up. They'll turn this into a personal attack." Mabel stared at the news ticker scrolling across the screen. Her face was still and pale, but her voice was steady. "Let them."
"I'm not backing down."
Jason stood.
"Mabel, listen.
"We're not dealing with angry bloggers. Whitley commands assets. People loyal to the old way. They'll dig until they find a weak point." "There is no weak point," Mabel said quietly.
Not anymore."
That night, they moved again. Grace arranged for a private flight to a military-owned retreat in Colorado, an old ranger station converted into a witness protection hub. There, beneath the veil of anonymity, Mabel worked with federal lawyers to prepare a full public statement. But she knew what would happen next. The final strike wouldn't come in the form of lawsuits or subpoenas. It would come as silence.
The systematic silencing of truth.
Days passed. Then one morning, a letter arrived.
No name.
No address. Only a single sheet of paper folded in half. Jason opened it while Grace reviewed updates. There were 6 words, typed in block capitals. "He didn't die in vain." And beneath that, a handwritten note. "We're not all gone.
Trust no one.
Follow the coordinates." Attached was a set of GPS coordinates leading to a remote part of New Mexico.
Jason held the letter out.
We have a choice to make.
Grace glanced at Mabel.
I said everything I needed to in that chamber, Mabel said. Jason shook his head.
No.
You gave them facts. But this could be proof that there are more like David. Survivors. Witnesses. Grace didn't speak for a moment. Then she turned to the burner phone and dialed. 2 hours later, they were in the air again. The coordinates led them to a ghost town buried in the canyons of northern New Mexico. A decaying mining village, long abandoned, its buildings sun-bleached and skeletal. Jason stepped out first, scanning the area with binoculars. Grace followed, one hand on her holstered weapon. Mabel brought only David's notebook, clutched close to her chest. In the middle of the town square stood a rusted metal bench. On it sat a woman, wrapped in a faded army parka. Her hair was short, her eyes sharp. She didn't stand, but nodded slightly when they approached. You came, she said.
Who are you?
Jason asked. They used to call me Ghost Line.
Signal Division, 20 years.
I worked with David.
Mabel stepped forward.
You knew him? The woman nodded.
He's avid ME.
When the order came to disappear those of us asking too many questions, he warned me. Helped me vanish. I've been underground ever since. Jason narrowed his eyes. Why now? Because your story broke the surface. And because I'm not the only one who's been watching. She reached into her coat and pulled out a small drive. This is a mirror of the backup network David built.
Encrypted.
Rotating caches.
Always evidence.
But you need to get it to the public. Not the government. Grace took the drive carefully. You're not coming with us? I can't. If they see me, others die. Mabel looked at her, eyes full of something between sorrow and solidarity.
You're still running.
The woman smiled faintly.
Not running. Holding the line. They left the ghost town at dusk, the windowing through broken windows like the echo of all secret.
Back in the cabin that night, Grace sat alone uploading the files to 3 separate cloud networks. Jason paced, listening for any sign of approach. Mabel lit a single candle beside the desk and began writing again. But now, her words weren't only for David. They were for the others who hadn't spoken yet.
The whistleblower. The forgotten.
The buried. And for a nation just beginning to understand that its soul was not in the hands of its leaders, but in the hands of those who dared to remember. The night before the public release, the mountain air outside the cabin was thin and electric. Mabel stood alone on the balcony, wrapped in a heavy sweater, staring into the stars.
Somewhere down in the valley, cities slept.
Or pretended to. Inside, Grace was finalizing the secure file transfer protocols. Jason sat in the corner, cleaning his weapon methodically, though they all hoped it wouldn't come to that again. The drive from Ghost Line contained a web of connections that validated everything David had written. Names. Payments. Orders. Transcripts of intercepted communications. Even a grainy video showing a covert meeting in the basement of a U.S. embassy in Eastern Europe, a deal brokered by men whose faces Mabel now knew all too well. Tomorrow, everything changes, Grace said, walking to the window beside her. Or nothing does, Mabel replied. They've buried worse before. But not with the world watching, Jason said quietly. They had chosen 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time for the release. Coordinated across encrypted social channels, whistleblower platforms, and trusted independent media outlets, it would be impossible to erase. Within moments of publication, the entire archive, over 200 gigabytes of data, would live in hundreds of mirrored servers around the globe.
At 6 heures du matin, Mabel recorded one final video.
She sat before a plain backdrop, her hair tied back, eyes clear.
My name is Mabel King.
I was once a federal analyst. I am now a witness. What you are about to see is not a conspiracy theory. It is evidence. It is truth. And it may cost me everything. But if we don't speak when we can, we forfeit the right to ask why others stay silent.
This is for David Trask, and for all who never came back.
This is for those still afraid.
You are not alone.
She finished, clicked stop, and sent the video into the cloud. At 9 a.m., the servers went live.
The world convulsed.
Within 20 minutes, news networks in 5 countries interrupted programming. The files had been picked up by international journalists from Reuters, BBC, and NHK. A special task force from the European Parliament announced it would launch an independent review of U.S. foreign policy operations. Back in Washington, Senator Whitley's office released a statement calling the material fabricated by hostile actors. But the evidence was too detailed, too verified, too wide. Twitter exploded. The hashtag Trask Files was trending in 40 countries. David's final journal entries were shared like sacred scripture. His final audio recording, discovered on the mirrored drive, was played live on multiple outlets. His voice, calm and resolute, said, "If this reaches you, it means I didn't make it. But it also means the truth did." By noon, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence issued a rare press conference. Behind bulletproof glass, the interim DNI admitted to serious lapses in oversight and promised a full criminal investigation. The first arrest was made before sundown. A former assistant deputy in the Defense Intelligence Agency was taken into custody, leaving his Georgetown home. Cameras captured him in handcuffs, his face hidden beneath a baseball cap. But the retaliation came just as fast. That night, a black SUV without plates was spotted circling the retreat. Jason and Grace prepared defensive positions. But the SUV left without incident. The next morning, an email was sent to every major platform that had published the archive, a legal demand from a firm connected to a powerful lobbying group, claiming violation of national security statutes. "They're trying to scare us," Grace said.
Standard tactique. Suppression through intimidation.
"But it won't work," Mabel added.
Not anymore.
She had become a symbol, reluctant, tired, but unstoppable. In the days that followed, crowds began gathering outside federal buildings. Young protesters held signs that read, "Truth doesn't need clearance." Veterans stood silently with pictures of David Trask. A mural of him appeared overnight on a concrete wall in Brooklyn, half his face in shadow, the other lit by dawn. But not everyone was supportive. Mabel received anonymous threats. She was accused of treason on talk radio and cable news. A petition to have her arrested for leaking classified information gained over 300,000 signatures. It didn't matter that she hadn't leaked anything herself. The narrative was shifting. "You don't fight monsters without becoming a target," Jason told her one night. "I didn't want to fight monsters," she whispered. "I just wanted to be heard." "You were," Grace said, placing a hand on her shoulder. "And now it's echoing." Then came the invitation. A congressional hearing. Live. Nationally televised. They wanted Mabel to testify. "I can't protect you in there," Grace warned. "You shouldn't have to," Mabel replied. The chamber was full. Camera lights glared. Rows of senators sat before her, each with carefully stacked papers, earpieces, and water glasses. Behind her, journalists waited with pens poised. The room buzzed with the artificial hum of microphones, a theater of civility hiding years of darkness. The chairwoman spoke. "Ms. King, thank you for appearing.
Do you swear to tell the truth?" I do.
The first hour was procedural. When, where, how she received the notebook. Her relationship with David. Her former roles. But then it turned. Senator Whitley leaned forward. "Ms. King, are you aware that dissemination of classified materials, even posthumously, is a federal offense?" "I am. And yet you published them." "I didn't publish them. I made sure they couldn't be buried again." "You jeopardized national security." Mabel paused. "No," she said. "I challenged the false security of silence." The room held its breath. She continued. "David Trask died because he believed truth mattered more than power.
I am not a hero.
I was scared, and I still am. But fear is not an excuse for complicity. If our institutions can't bear the weight of transparency, then they were never worthy of trust." One by one, people began to applaud. The chairwoman pounded the gavel. Order. But the moment had passed. The tide had turned. 2 weeks later, an independent investigative commission was formed with oversight from the United Nations. 3 months after that, 27 officials across multiple departments were indicted.
5 pled guilty.
Trials were scheduled to begin the following year. Mabel declined all interview requests. She returned quietly to Vermont, to the farmhouse David had once written about. She took up teaching again, ethics in intelligence. Jason moved to D.C., working to support other whistleblowers. Grace joined a non-profit that provided legal protection for truth-tellers. But some things didn't go back to normal. They weren't supposed to.
On a called autumn afternoon, Mabel walked through the woods behind the house and found a stone at the base of an old pine tree.
She'd placed it there herself. The name etched on it was simple.
David Trask. 1976-2023.
He chose to speak. She knelt beside it, placing a hand on the rough surface. They listened, she said softly. They finally listened. In the rustling trees, she imagined a reply. Or perhaps, just silence. The kind that came after the storm. But never again before.